Hi everyone. Tonight we're going to be talking about the early stages of planting design and site design, starting with gathering inventory and then kind of assessing that inventory and starting a process that we call conceptual bubble diagramming. So it's important that we actually go out to visit a site and collect site data. And then a lot of times we record this information and convey that graphically. And so these are a couple examples of maybe vegetation patterns that exist on a project or slopes that exist on a project. So we've been out to the site, we've visited, maybe we have a contour map or a topo map for the slopes, and we can start to interpret that information. So a lot of times we convey this kind of verbally or just our own understandings, but at certain times, like we might have to do a vegetation inventory or a tree inventory of a site. So that would be an example of these inventory graphics. So if we're looking at site data, we tend to look at existing structural conditions. Those might include where the utility lines are on a project, where the water meter is located, which would be our point of connection, easements, if there's downspouts off a building that are draining into the landscape, good to know where those are, the overall drainage patterns of a site, any sewer cleanouts, irrigation lines, or other components like that we have to work around. We have some design considerations to look at. Where are the doors and windows located? Doors are especially important to know. To bring our pathway up to the building, we need to know where those doors are. Windows are also nice information to have so that we can set views outside the windows looking out into the landscape. We should look at if there's existing views, good and bad, off of the project. Is there a prevailing wind? Some of our canyon properties have a pretty brisk wind year-round, and in the winter months it can be pretty chilly. Do we need to have shade? Is it a south-facing patio area that's going to be very hot and uncomfortable most parts of the year? Maybe in that we would put some shade in that area. Screening. So if we have those unfavorable views, we might want to put up a wall of plants or hard materials to minimize noise or block unwanted views. Which plants are we going to keep? Are there any natural features? A lot of our inland sites have beautiful clusters of these boulders popping out of the ground, so those would be an example of a natural feature that we might want to preserve. How about the growing conditions? What is the soil like? What's the soil texture? Is there good drainage or poor drainage? Sometimes we have to ask our client if they know the drainage pattern, if it's a smaller scale project. What's the sun and shade exposure on the property? Are there any microclimates? Those are little pockets that have unusual conditions. And I think of a really common one is when you have subdivision houses close together, and there's the one side of the house that is just blocked and it never gets any sun, and everything's kind of moist and there's like moss growing over there. That would be an example of a microclimate. Are there any slopes on the project? And then a really great resource, if you guys can get a hold of it, is a Sunset Western Garden book, and try to determine the climate zone. So in the West, we use the Sunset Western Garden book for our climate zones. In other parts of the countries, they use the USDA zones, which don't work quite as well in our region. So after we collect our inventory, we actually, as designers, analyze that and come up with kind of preliminary solutions. So an example of that would be maybe I have a 6-inch diameter trunk, so a relatively established tree in the backyard that's a beautiful flowering specimen. So my analysis would be I want to protect that tree and make sure that it's not impacted if I'm going to redesign the landscape. Maybe I have one of those little tiny narrow pathways to the front door. And so my analysis says, oh, I want a bigger, grander entry. So I'm going to enlarge that pathway to make it a more welcoming entry. Maybe the neighbor has a huge motorhome stored right against a fence line, and that's kind of an ugly view. So our analysis as a designer might be that I want to screen the west edge of the property, maybe with like a row of shrubs, something simple. So once we kind of understand what's important to the site, we can start representing the information graphically. So we start kind of doing these analysis bubble diagrams or functional diagrams, and they're also known as Lynch diagrams. So we're going to start with a site plan. This can be sometimes an assessor's parcel map. That's something that's usually included in people's purchase documents for the house. It's a basic perimeter that shows the boundaries of the property, and it has a measurement and it's to a scale. If you need to get that and they can't find their mortgage documents, they can give you permission to go down to the assessor's office and get a copy of that. You could get information from a field survey. So a lot of times on bigger projects, the surveyor's gone out and they've created a topographic base map, and it also shows the hard elements. And then on smaller projects, really it's up to us to create a base map. So we might be measuring the site and create our own base plan to work off of. And there's an example, maybe a little front yard area. So as we start to think about what we're going to do with this site, what amenities maybe that our client wants, or what we think is a good idea as a designer, we want to focus first on functionality. And I like to say form follows function. And that if you don't take the time to plan for the function that needs to happen on the site, then it doesn't matter how pretty your design is, it's probably going to get removed and not be a long-lived design because it doesn't suit the people who are using that property. So when you're kind of trying to understand how the site needs to function, think about things like how the space could be used, not how it's currently being used. Will you have outdoor areas that are outdoor rooms or view gardens or pathways? Where do they need to have access to? Are the trash cans on the side of the house and they have to roll them out to the front curb? What's that path look like? Do you want to add things like seating areas or maintenance pathways through planting islands, or meander through your yard or the slope with kind of a circular route so that you have a pathway through the side yards? So these are important things to consider before you start design. And it really comes down, at least at the residential scale, it really comes down to we're designing kind of three types of spaces. We're designing an outdoor room, a view garden, or a passageway, or a combination of these. So we're going to work tonight in our lab practicing creating bubble diagrams I'm going to give you a site, but here's an example of how that might look. So you can see on the preliminary one, we just have a main walkway straight into the house and two small planting areas on each side and a small landing right before you go through a threshold. I actually know this project, so I know there's a little perimeter wall and then it's like a courtyard and then you go in the house. So first start by identifying what is my paths of travel, what's my primary path of travel, what's any kind of maintenance or cut through paths of travel, and where are our planting areas going to be located. And then you can take the next step of saying which heights of plants are we going to use? Are they going to be taller plants that are almost functioning as a separation, as an outdoor room wall? Are they going to be medium plants or low plants? And a lot of times it's nice to layer our plant heights so that you get this kind of layered display of plants. So here's an example for a site that creates, like, this is like I would say a little turf conversion project in front of somebody's house. You can see that they need to access both sides of their property. Maybe there's gates or meters that the meter guy has to read over here. So they need to access both sides of the house. They decided to create this little outdoor room space. They need some screening plants. So maybe they have that neighbor with big motor home right here. They don't want to look at it every day. Nice to be able to have a little bit of a separation from the street where they could maybe keep the living room windows open and look out into this little outdoor room and have a more of an indoor-outdoor connection. Nice to think about an accent feature in houses. So that could be beautiful, colorful pot draping with flowers, or a little specimen tree, or a succulent, or maybe a bubbling urn. So those are features that add interest. Also nice to have low plants along walkway areas. It makes those walkways feel bigger and more generous. Here's an example of a smaller outdoor room, and it also has a stormwater swale. And this is becoming more and more important at the single-family residential because the latest rebates require you to have some kind of stormwater management. So this is kind of that dry stream bed effect. We want to pull the water away from the house, not have any ponding close to the house. Pull it away and infiltrate it in an area that's away from our client's house or structure and other people's structures. But a nice strategy to start implementing stormwater and an outdoor room, and then some planting. Here's an example of a small front yard that maybe they want a more dramatic entry into their house. So instead of having to walk up the driveway and over this little skinny path, maybe they're going to create a grand stairway up through here and into the house. And of course, kind of a view garden around it. This one has screening. You can see they only need to access the one side of the house in this particular bubble diagram. And then this might be an example of a view garden. So in this, kind of scenario where you're doing a turf renovation project, a lot of people have a lot of amenities and entertaining areas behind the house. So they might not want to hang out in front in an outdoor room. They might just want a pretty display of plants. So in this configuration, we've just got some nice islands of plants and a little maintenance pathway meandering through there. And this might be a living room window that we've located some kind of an accent tree or succulent or feature so that, again, you're setting a view outside the window. So we want to establish early on, we want to establish the functionality of the site and bring in some of our ideas. And we want to do this at a very quick, easy pass so that we're not spending a lot of time on this stage. And then we can start to discuss with the clients like, hey, I was thinking that you could have this outdoor room, and I know you're a morning person and it's east facing, and this could be just like a nice morning area with the morning sun, and you could be out reading the paper or on your social media or whatever you do with your coffee. But these kind of conceptual bubble diagram phase are really important because they also show the functionality or the relationship between different spaces. So once again, if a plan does not function, it will not be a successful design no matter how beautiful it is. So really important to pin down that underlying functionality. So here's an example of a real project. This was prior to redesign. This is the Immaculate Conception Church in Old Town, San Diego, right by the area that's closed traffic and you walk through. It is a historic church there. The original church burned, I think it went down in an earthquake, and this one was rebuilt in the 20s, but a very old site. And they had 2 giant palm trees that were right here that got diseased, and they had to take them out. And so they brought us, me and a friend in, and just they had someone with enough vision to know this courtyard could be so much more. And they really wanted a gathering spot for their parishioners after church, or to have locations where they could do like blessings of the animals and not bring animals into the church. So that's what they were hoping this space could evolve into. So we did our analysis and diagramming. We documented these existing planters, which were really strange because they didn't match any of, they were just like these weird CMU planters, and they didn't, the surface didn't have the architectural classic character. It's like somebody stuck some stone on there, and we were not impressed with them. We also noticed that it was blocking the sight lines to their little shrine area. The shrine area to me was a bit overgrown. I liked it being nestled in this area, but I just thought they were missing opportunities with some of the beautiful architecture, having these vines grow up it. And I thought it was a little homemade looking. There was poor drainage, big drainage issues with damage to the church because everything was draining into the side of the church. So water would actually run inside the church in rain events. So, and then that caused also accessibility problems for disabled people, challenges on their accessible route. And they did have a big, beautiful existing sycamore that they wanted to keep. So we wanted to work around that. So we started with a bubble diagram, just like you're learning tonight. So the idea was to try and create a relatively flat space outside where people could congregate, to have a little patch of lawn, to have a direct entry point from, so you didn't have to go through the church, you could actually go through the courtyard. And then we have our main accessible path of travel. So you go through the parish hall, but there's disabled parking off to the right, and then secondary circulation through the site. And then we, of course, maintained our shrine area. And then on the right, that conceptual bubble diagram evolved into this design. So we're trying to pick up this kind of more formal courtyard. We have this gathering spot, a bosque of trees. We've got a little shrine area that's its own separate little space within it. Initially, we were trying to keep a little bit of lawn, but at the end of the day, they decided to just go with a ground cover over there. Some little seat walls around so that people could gather here informally, enjoy the shrine, or they could set up tables have their spaghetti dinner outside. So meant to be a flexible space for them. And then this was the final project with that. So we did not change any of the architecture. We just changed the landscape around it, but you can really see the beautiful arches that were already in that space, but hidden by all the vines and the palms. And I think, we kept the Virgin and the Juan Diego in the exact same locations where they were, but we really built this scene around them that was meant to be witnessing the apparition of the Virgin back in the day. And I really love, this is just one of those design flukes that happened, but when we added the lighting at night, it looks like the Virgin has angel's wings. So that was just kind of a nice surprise of the way that worked out. So we're really happy with that space. I worked with an artist in conjunction with an artist on the shrine on this particular one, so it was fun to kind of design that together. Another view of the shrine and the beautiful stained glass windows all lit up looking into the space. Here's kind of before it got dark, they lit it up. You can get a sense, so you can sit on the boulders. There's culturally, we wanted to include some shelves for people to leave candles or offerings to the Virgin. You can get a sense of that bigger space with the busk of trees and tree grates and the ability to gather out there when church is not in session. There is a bit of a steep slope because there was just such a big grade change in here. I would have liked this flatter than it came out to be, but you work with what you can. So you get a sense of that slope a little bit in this, but there was nothing we could do about that one. You can see this nice terracotta banding, which also doubles as donor paver tiles. So it's an ongoing way for the church to make money and be able to maintain the historic church. It's kind of unfortunate because they stay open to the public, because they're a historic site, they actually have a lot of vandalism. So this is helping offset some of the vandalism impacts to the church and not coming out of their main operational budget. And also helping them restore important parts of the church. We had that drainage problem, so we actually made the, this picture kind of throws it off a little bit, but the grade actually drains down over here into this trench drain, and this trench drain is catching on this side. It kind of goes through the wall, and over there it catches too, and that takes it out to the street. So we don't have any water running into the church anymore, which is great. Okay, so that is it for this session. And I'm going to post a little video on bubble diagramming for you. All right.